Hello, everyone. Welcome back to St. Louis Teens, and welcome back to our series on young venture capitalists. We're here today with Jason Shuman. Jason is a current partner at Primary Ventures and previously was the youngest partner in the firm's history. In college, Jason launched and ran a DTC footwear company that sold customized shoes. Jason is also a Forbes 30 under 30 venture capitalist. Jason, thank you so much for your phenomenal support of the next generation of entrepreneurs, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks, man. Thanks for what you do. It's awesome to see guys like you getting up and running in the industry right now.
Jason, thank you so much. Can you share with us what drove you to the field of venture capital and entrepreneurship, and what was the most favorite part of your journey so far?
Yeah, so I came into the world of venture capital and a bit of a windy road, I would say. You kind of remind me a little bit of myself because I was, starting companies when I was a little kid. I mean, I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. My mom's a therapist, my dad's an entrepreneur, all my aunts and uncles are entrepreneurs. And so I fell in love with startups in like middle school. I mean, I was like writing business plans back then. High school, I got the chance to work at an identity theft protection company that was my aunt and uncle's at the time and worked under a former VC there. But I ended up starting my first company in undergrad, and I didn't feel like, you'd really learn how to start a company in the classroom. I felt like that was something that you just had to do. And I ended up launching that company, which you referenced, that was called Category 5, bootstrapped it with, four of my best friends. And to be honest, it was just a complete grind. And ran the company for about a year in school and a year out, and went through the ringer with it. I mean, cash flow issues, co-founder breakups, like it was a windy road. And when you're somebody who's starting a company in undergrad, a lot of people look at you like you know exactly what it is that you want to do in life. And come 23 years old, when I was living in Boston after college down in Miami and feeling burnt out, I knew that I just was not going to be doing it for the next 10 years. And so decided to wind the business down and ended up, recognizing that venture capital was going to be the world for me, mainly because I felt like, one, I could learn about different industries quickly. Two, I could meet great people to start a company with. Three, I could, raise money easier. And then the fourth one, which is honestly the reason why I'm still in it today, is it just really aligns with my why in life, to give other people the confidence and skill set to go out and achieve. So I ended up doing some crazy stuff in order to get my job in VC. I sourced deals for like 4 months for free during the day, and I drove for Uber at
Wow.
night. And one thing led to the other, and here we are. You and I are chatting now about 7 years later.
And Jason, throughout that journey now, you're now one of the youngest VCs. I want to ask, what are some of your keys to success in the field of venture capital? And what are some of the obstacles that young VCs can face?
I think that you need to show up and bring your A game to every single interaction. And part of that is that, there's unique power dynamics in venture capital. And oftentimes when you get onto the buy side of the table as a VC, it starts to make people's egos a little bit big. And unfortunately, I think a few things. One, like you really need to treat people with respect. Like entrepreneurs are, day by day, like they're starting their companies, they're grinding through things. There's emotional highs, there's emotional lows. Like they're putting themselves on the line. So when they come in to pitch you, you really got to give them like everything you've got in that meeting, because at the end of the day, it's their job that's way harder than ours. And like you should be appreciative and bring a level of curiosity into those meetings. And I think that, this is also a business that all you have is your reputation, especially in the early days. So you need to make sure that you're giving everybody everything that you've got. With that said, I think that there's a few other like simple things that people can do in order to be successful. The first one is you got to work really hard. There's a lot of smart people out there in the world. So you got to work really hard, and you probably got to out hustle them. Number two, you got to figure out what your superpower is. Like, what do you find easy that other people find difficult? That at the end of the day is where you should probably double down. And the third is like find your unique advantage and try to figure out a way to like build a brand for yourself. And maybe that's by specializing, especially these days where so many people like want these jobs in venture capital, and there's less VCs or junior VCs than there are, professional baseball players. So I think that's really important. In terms of your second question, obstacles, we're playing in a competitive environment right now. In 2014, when I first got into this, 2015, we were all doing deals together, like at the seed stage. Like it was literally like, we could give a term sheet out and put in 350, and everybody, and then Lear could come in and put in 250, and Red Sea and all these people. And And now, it's a different ball game. We're leading deals, we're taking 15 to 20% ownership stakes, and there's not a lot of room left over for everybody else. And when you're a younger investor, oftentimes you don't have a long track record. And you might be going up against some of the legends that you and I have heard about, on all these other podcasts. And you got to figure out a way that you're going to convince a founder to take your money over their money, and that's not easy. So I think figuring out what your approach is going to be day to day, trying to get and win these deals is a big thing.
And I think even before we sort of jump into the deal itself, I want to sort of hit on one of the things you brought up is finding your own personal unique sort of advantage. And there's no one way, to necessarily evaluate a company or an idea. So I want to ask you, Jason, how do you personally sort of find new ventures, ideas, and companies? And what are some of the metrics that you personally use to evaluate them as well?
It really depends. There's so many different ways to source deals. And I think that, one of the biggest changes for me in the last 2 years or 3 years, really, since I joined Primary, has been my approach to sourcing. Back in the day, we used to get really a lot of our deal flow from other investors, and we would have deal calls with other VCs. And that's changed because, going back to what I just said, like, you can't necessarily get those deals anymore because you're competing for those deals now. With that said, I also think it's really important, based on the speed at which deals are getting done, that you're bringing a prepared mind into whatever the industry is. And, for me over at Primary, that's primarily focused on healthcare, focused on fintech, and focused on prop tech, mainly on the consumer side of things. And within those realms, I'm doing a lot of reading. I'm doing a lot of conversations with other investors downstream, with other founders of companies that might be Series A, Series B, Series C, et cetera. And I'm talking to other operators. There's some really smart people out there, and it's good to just understand like what their point of view is on the world and where they see it going. And then you got to figure out what yours is. And once you start putting your name out there and your thoughts out there and the sphere, you'll start hearing about people starting companies. There are nodes in the ecosystem that are like, the folks that just hear about everything. And those are the people you've got to make sure are going to be like, your points of contact to getting good deal flow. In terms of like how we evaluate deals, there's a few different like core components to every deal. Like at the end of the day, like, we're betting on people. So like, I want to find founders that are super resourceful, that are super smart, that learn very, very fast, that, have the ability really to iterate, understand the tactics that they need to do. And then really we think about like, can these people sell? Like, can you sell stock? Can you sell your product? And can you sell people? Because those are the three things that are your job as a founder and CEO. Now, in terms of like the market, which is kind of like the next thing and followed by the product, we're looking for massive markets. Everybody talks about that, but it's like you really need to believe that either this is a massive market today, or that it's going to be a massive market because of X, Y, and Z tailwinds, that although analysts who are, sitting in their office, wherever it might be, are saying the market's only going to grow by 5 or 10%, a year, you're like, no, I fundamentally think they're wrong. Like, I think that it's going to grow by 50% or 100%. And I'll never forget, doing the diligence on Latch, which, went public not too long ago. And like, the smart lock market in the United States, according to these analysts, was like $500 million at the time. And like, there's no way that that was true. And there's no way that was going to be true in the future. And I just didn't believe it. And I think there was really good ways for you to argue against that. So finding these things where, you can have those massive tailwinds pushing you forward is really helpful. And then the last thing is, we're always looking for products that are, 10x better product experience for the consumer. Preferably that have sticky revenue. So recurring revenue that you'll see a consumer using. We always ask ourselves, like, is a consumer, or could I see myself using this, 3 years from now? If the answer is yes, that's probably a good company that you want to be backing. And then, if you can figure out ways that they can continue to build moats, these competitive, barriers to entry, whether that be through data or other forms of network effects, then that's usually a pretty powerful company that you want to get in bed with.
And Jason, I want to sort of tag along to that question. I want to ask, what is one company that you invested in that you feel is one of your most successful, but whether that's Lash or another business? And I want to also ask similarly, what is one company in hindsight that you wish you had invested?
Yeah, so I already mentioned Latch, so I'm not going to dive into that one. And actually, you've inspired me to tell a quick story here. So there's a company that I'm involved with called Dandy. They're pretty undercover right now in stealth mode, but have scaled up quite nicely to well over 100 people at this point. And that company was founded by a guy, well, actually two co-founders, Daniel Hanover and Tony Loco. But the reason I'm bringing up this story is I met Tony Loco when he was 17 years old.
Really?
Tony was living in Boston. Jeff Fagnan at Accomplice had asked my friend Chris Wolfel to chat with him and to help him out. And like luck would have it, I was at Chris's office that day. Tony came in, and Chris asked me if I wanted to join Tony and him for a whiteboard session. And so I jumped in the office and I was whiteboarding with them. And Tony's energy was just incredible, and the guy was like a total sponge. And at the end of the day, that company that he was working on at the time, it didn't work out. And he ended up going off to college. He went to Penn undergrad. He ended up working at a company called GoPuff, which at the time was not that big, which now is massive. And he really learned a lot and he matured a ton. And he was coming into New York and he was, interviewing for jobs at venture firms, specifically, internships. And he had offers from great firms like Insight and Bessemer, Stripes, and like he was, really thinking about did he want to go do that? And we kept in touch and we were getting lunch. And he mentioned though over that lunch that he had met this guy Daniel Hanover, and Daniel's company, started to really like hit this inflection point. And this was in like October. And I was like, that sounds super interesting. Like, why don't we chat more about it over the holidays in Boston? Because him and I both were from there. We ended up getting together. We ended up backing the company, about 2.5 years ago. And what started out as a company that was selling invisible aligners and connecting, customers to local dentists has since pivoted into an absolute monster of a business model within the dental space, and is doing incredibly well. And I couldn't be more proud of those guys.
And Jason, you just shared one of really inspiring stories of someone who really started as an entrepreneur at a very young age. I'd love to know, can you share with us some stories of inspiring young entrepreneurs and startups that you've had the opportunity to work with?
Yeah, I think Tony is like the absolute like most obvious example of that. But there's a joke internally at Primary that there's the Shuman special, and the Shuman special is a young founder who's just like full of energy and incredible hustle and intelligence, but is super green when it comes to operating. Hopefully they've had that experience where they've worked for one other person over time and gotten to see what going from 0 to 100 looks like, but that's not always going to be the case. And part of my bet on a lot of these people are that they're going to learn so quickly and they're still super super malleable and not stuck in their ways. So whether it's people like Tony or whether it's people like Sam Bernstein, who started LoftSmart, which is now pivoted into Table 22. You've got Sandeep Kumar, who was also over at LoftSmart and is now the founder of a company called Therefore. um, Daniel Singer, who's a guy that I met recently, who was starting companies, I think when he was 15 or 16, and now has a company called Tendies. It's been pretty great, all across the board to watch these people grow up. And I think there's multiple peaks in your venture career. The first peak starts to come when like you're getting the chance to back your friends, and like those are the people that start to become really successful. The second peak comes once those people have been successful, so you have the returns, and now you can get all the inbound deal flow you want. And I think I got my fingers crossed that these guys prove me right, and make some of the other folks in the market look like they made bad decisions passing up on them.
And Jason, you yourself started out as a very, very young entrepreneur at a very young age. You talked about how a lot of people in your family were entrepreneurs. You yourself had a lot of experience with entrepreneurship throughout college, throughout high school, and you continued your entrepreneurial journey throughout your life. And I do want to ask, what is one large obstacle that you face and you yourself faced, and now you notice other young entrepreneurs facing, and how did you personally overcome that?
You know, uh, when category five, my startup did not work out, I was really, really burnt out. And not only was I really burnt out, but I thought I always knew like what I wanted to go do. And, my friends had at that point were already working in jobs and already getting salaries. And I was sitting there and I had $400 in my bank account and my confidence was shot and I didn't have the energy to like really even get moving in the right direction. And I took a little bit of time off to like really recharge my batteries. And then I sat down and I like went through an exercise. And that exercise was, what do I want to optimize for in my next, role? And at the end of the day, like you're gonna have multiple tours of duty in your life where you're gonna have multiple, mileposts along the way that at the end of the day, you're gonna take away certain things from certain jobs and opportunities. And so figuring out what it was that I wanted to optimize for at each step along the way and why I wanted to go into venture capital, but then more specifically, putting together a plan on how I was going to get a job in venture capital and keeping myself accountable to that plan, where it was a big, big thing for me. And I would highly recommend that, when people are trying to accomplish something, that they share their goals with people. Because by sharing your goals with people, you're going to basically help hold yourself more accountable because people are going to ask you about it in the months to follow.
And I'm personally very fortunate, Jason, that my school has something to sort of support young entrepreneurs. And it's an entrepreneurship program called Spark Incubator. And I owe lots of my personal growth to Spark. How do you think that more high schools and colleges can facilitate an environment for innovation and entrepreneurship?
I think it's important that there's a lot of access to information these days, whether it's podcasts like the 20-minute VC, or really good books out there, about startups. And I think that the more that we can push people to start to learn about the things that are required, in order to start companies, the better. And getting exposure for kids into startups at a young age would be wonderful because they can see the high energy environment, they can see the responsibility that they can have, they can see the dopamine hits of accomplishing something really quickly. And I think that by doing so, that people would be in a much, much better place to get rolling. And I think that a big piece of the challenge here today as we look at the startup ecosystem is exposing kids, especially kids in like lower income areas, to the startup world. And I feel like if we can figure out ways to make that happen, that we'll have talent that then gets trained up over time. And then more founders will come from, different areas that today aren't really getting as much entrepreneurship.
I think that's such an important message as well, to not only increase entrepreneurship opportunities in certain high schools, but try to make entrepreneurship opportunities more available for sort of everyone, to make that more democratized almost. And Jason, I want to ask this question because you have backgrounds in both of these fields. You've been an entrepreneur basically your whole life, and now you're into the venture capital world. How do you think that teen entrepreneurs can leverage the resources of the venture capital world?
Don't be afraid to reach out, man. I think you did it, and look, we're here right now. I mean, I'm just hoping that you move to New York after you go out west. That way, we get a chance to work together. But I think being really thoughtful when you reach out, having very specific asks, keeping it short, and trying to go hunt down, some of the best people in whatever field that you want to go learn about. You know, I know there's that cheesy line or quote that people see in high school yearbooks, which is like, it's by Wayne Gretzky, and he talks about how you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. But the fact of the matter is, that's true. Like, if you go and you send out 100 LinkedIn messages, which, by the way, I used to do that all the time, like when I was growing up, like, go send out 100 LinkedIn messages. If two of them respond, you're still talking to two incredible people. And most of the time, good people want to be helpful to young people. And so just going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, I think like people want to be helpful, people want to add value. And when they have the time or bandwidth to do so, they will. And like I specifically try to put aside a little bit of time each week to do these types of things. And I think that the younger people in the next generation, if we pay it forward, ideally they'll be paying it forward as well.
And Jason, I want to ask, what is your advice for teens and youth, and how can we be innovators and be agents of change just like yourself?
you know, think big. At the end of the day, think really big. Don't think about the thing that like you want to start on your college campus to like just solve that thing that is happening to everybody. Like that's not big enough. Like, I want you to think about the fact that like you can change the world, and like what can you do in order to do that with a major step function. And with that, I think a big theme that I've been thinking a lot about, and like I think one amazing thing about you guys, I think you'd be considered Gen Z, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so the Gen Z, you guys are always thinking more and more. Not, I'm not gonna say always. I don't want to be broadly saying this, but I know a lot of people are very, very caring. That Gen Z, and they want to really help the world. And I think that thinking about every opportunity or specifically in consumer, in regards to democratizing access. If you can democratize access with a great product to solutions that historically have only been available to large businesses or wealthy people in major cities, you'll do very well for yourself and you'll do very well for the world at the same time.
Jason, we thank you so much for your phenomenal leadership, support of the venture community, and for your support of young entrepreneurs and the value that they bring to our country. And thank you so much for your time today and answering all of our questions.
Thanks for having me, man.